Heart, are you great enough for a love that never tires? Oh, heart, are you great enough for love? Alfred Lord Tennyson. How it ends. We've crossed the straight line, Louise, Peter said quietly a while later as I huddled silent and numb against the passenger door, staring at the dried blood on my shoes. And I'll either have to leave you somewhere or marry you now. Whatever you choose. Marry me, I said dully, because I didn't want to be alone. We stopped in a little town and had a justice of the peace ceremony. The details are hazy, but I remember the justice asking if we were in trouble, and I knew by the way he said it that he was asking if I was pregnant, so I said yes and started to cry, and he married us in a real ceremony. I have the official marriage license to prove it. We got hot dogs at a drive-in joint and a room in a cheap motel. He took one bed, I the other. We slept like the dead. I moved through those first weeks in a thick gray cloud, barely speaking, plagued by nightmare sights and smells, always curled into myself, trusting no one, missing my mother, and even more, the Ciro's photo, barely able to think about what had happened at the Bames, if either of them were still alive, if the nurse was still there, or if the state home knew or even cared that I was gone. Peter was very kind and cautious with me, speaking quietly, watching me closely, teasing me into reluctant styles, making sure I ate, and even bought me a ring, a plain sterling silver band he found in a pawnshop. Good deals were necessary, as all we had was what we'd left with. I, of course, had nothing. We found a medium-sized town where newcomers weren't noticeable, and rented a small apartment. He got a job working nights on the railroad, loading freight, and I waitressed days at the local diner. We saw each other briefly in the morning and again at dinner. I never realized it then, but now I believe Peter had done that deliberately, to give me time to adjust, to get to know him without feeling threatened or obligated or scared. Peter carried a story of his own, one I was too oblivious at that point to ask about. I'd never worked for money before, never even had $5 to my name, and the first night I realized I was allowed to keep the quarters I'd slid off the tables, I was ecstatic. I danced home, spread it all out on the counter in a kitchenette, and ignoring Peter's good-natured amusement, counted it out and vowed that if tips were left for good service, then I would become the best waitress in the country. That was the first time I had ever seen him laugh aloud, and was surprised to see he had 2 ginger plates, one for his 4 top front teeth, and one for his bottom front tooth, both held in place with metal that hooked to his side teeth. The moment he saw I'd noticed, he flushed and stopped laughing. "Wait," I said, but he just shook his head and disappeared into the bedroom to get ready for work. I felt bad then, because I knew I'd embarrassed him, but didn't know how to make it right, because other than his name, the fact that he was Dutch, I didn't know anything at all about him. I know that sounds ridiculous now, but in an age when nothing is sacred or private, when people go on talk shows and spill the ugliest parts of themselves, the darkest tragedies, and the most degrading behavior. But it wasn't like that back then. There was a process. And yes, Peter and I jumped the gun by marrying, but then we backed up straight to the beginning and began the slow, steady dance of getting to know and trust each other and falling in love. Because we did fall in love. After all I'd seen of love dying, it was a miracle to feel the joy of its birth. Peter loved to fish, and on Sundays I would pack a picnic lunch, and we would drive out to a lonely stretch of the river, and I would read and sneak peeks at him while he cast from the shore. Sometimes I would open the bags with our lunch and find a little surprise from the 5 and dime, a bangle bracelet, a pretty little hand mirror, or a bottle of Lily of the Valley cologne. And he would smile at my delight, and yes, it did take me far too long to realize he was wooing me. The idea electrified me like nothing else ever had, pushing all the darkness and sadness aside and making me look at him. Our apartment, my ring, the small amount of time we were able to spend together, I looked at it all differently. Now the idea that when I rose from the bed, he would tumble into it, into the warm hollow I'd created with my body, become a thing of blushing intimacy, and I began wearing just a dab of Lily of the Valley cologne to bed so my scent would be there when he slipped under the covers after I left in the morning. I noticed how the sun glinted off his thick black hair, smooth and shiny as a crow's wing, and how he would sing when he was in a good mood or wanted to make me laugh, Sam Cooke's Chain Gang, before he left for work at night, and in the morning a little more tiredly but twice as loud and silly as I left for work. He would stand at the front door and belt out, "Maurice Williams, stay," making me laugh and blush and half run down the street, always turning back to wave, always seeing him waiting there, watching me with a smile. People looked at me with a kind of amusement, men saying, "He's got it bad, sister," and women asking if he had a single brother. It made me dance all the way to work and smile at everyone, even the crabbiest customers who sent their food back or made a mess of their table and left me a nickel tip, but I didn't care. He was singing to me. I started setting aside tips each day because I wanted to buy him a surprise in return, and decided on a transistor radio I saw in Woolworth's. That way our apartment would have music, and maybe he would sing to me even more, maybe love songs like "Put Your Head on My Shoulder," or "I Only Have Eyes for You," and maybe he would ask me to dance, only I didn't know how. and the thought panicked me so much that I asked one of the other waitresses, Coral, how to dance, and she grabbed the cook out of the kitchen, a short, round little man with a 5 o'clock shadow and a cigar stub stuck between his lips, and fed the jukebox $2 whole, playing slow songs just to teach me. I bought the transistor radio, then went to the library and found a Dutch cookbook, got a library card, and brought the book home, poring over it in secret and trying to find something not too hard and not too expensive that I could make for him as a surprise. I decided on a rice pie, a wonderful sounding yeast crust pie with a vanilla and milk rice pudding type filling, and made it on Saturday so we could take it to the river with us on Sunday. It was a beautiful Sunday. I took care of my outfit, wanting to look beautiful and desirable and feeling frustrated at my scant wardrobe. Still, my hair was curled and my lipstick perfect, and I smelled of lily of the valley, and the pie and the radio had been secretly and carefully tucked into the picnic basket. The riverbank was deserted as usual, with only the occasional car of churchgoers passing by, and as we spread the blanket beneath the tree, he said he'd been thinking of taking on some extra work, not double shifts at the railroad, but at a nearby construction site, where they were looking for good, strong temporary laborers. "We could bank that extra money, Louise, and when we have enough, maybe we could buy a little house somewhere," he said almost shyly. "I know you want a home of your own, and things would be pretty tight. We'd have to sacrifice, but I think we could do it." He shrugged. "I don't know, just an idea." "It's a great idea," I said, overcome. "Oh, Peter, it's a wonderful idea." And without even thinking, I threw my arms around him, and the moment my body touched his, a bolt of electricity shocked us into stillness, but only for a heartbeat, because his arms came around me in a way that promised never to let me go, never to let me down, never to hurt me or betray me or live without me, and he breathed my name on an exhale as sweet as the sunny day. I lifted my face, and he lowered his and kissed me, and kissed me, and kissed me, and probably would have kept on kissing me had a car not slowed down the road, and a woman said right out in broad daylight, "Shameless, you young people have no morals at all if they need more." And Peter, eyes bright, mouth carved, and a wide smile, pulled back slightly and winked at me, called, "I hate to break it to you, lady, but this young person is my wife." "Baloney," the old man next to the woman snapped. "Nobody kisses his wife like that, especially out in public." Scowling, he stepped on the gas, and an enormous old Plymouth chugged off in a cloud of dust. We looked at each other and laughed, and he kept his arm around me, and oh, the glory of nestling my head into the curve of his neck and shoulder, the absolute rightness of knowing all I had to do was lift my face and he would kiss it, of discovering that if I reached out, he would reach back, clasp my hand, hold tight, lift it to his lips, and kiss it, watching me, dark eyes glowing. I gave him the radio, and he got so quiet that I thought he didn't like it, but that wasn't it at all. He said that no one had bought him anything since his parents had been killed in the war, and he was so touched that I started to cry, because I hadn't known that he was an orphan too. And because of how miraculous it was that we'd ended up together. Then, because our stomachs were rumbling, he switched on the radio while I laid out the food, and of course the first song they played wasn't a beautiful romantic love song, but Brenda Lee's sassy Sweet Nothings, which of course he had to sing along to me, grabbing my hand and pulling me up to twist with him on the grass, and I was laughing and twisting and singing right back as if I'd lived my whole life for this one joyous moment, and oh, the freedom of being silly, of teasing and flirting, and seeing the gleam of appreciation in his eyes. Out of everything that has ever happened to us our whole lives, that one magnificent day with the sun and the birds and the river and the discovery of the homemade Dutch rice pie, which almost made him cry, and the transistor playing in the background of so many kisses, was without a doubt the most beautiful. We didn't talk of darker things that day, and we didn't run straight home and fall into bed either. No, we ran straight home and spent a hot, sweaty, panting hour kissing on the couch, an hour that left me dazzled and topless, left him frustrated at having to stop and get ready to go to work. "You can't lay there like that," he said hoarsely, looking at me. "I'll never leave, Louise. I swear you have to put your shirt on, or I'll stay, and then I'll get fired, and we'll lose our apartment and end up out in the street, and—" "Oh, all right," I said, giggling and pulling my crumpled shirt over me. "There, is that better?" "No," he said with a weak grin. "I don't want to leave you." "Ever?" I said, suddenly solemn. "Ever." And he gave me a tender kiss. "I knew that the minute I saw you." "Really?" I said, gazing into his eyes and running a fingertip down his cheek. "Would I lie to you?" he said. "No," I said, and a smile that held all the happiness in the world blossomed. We made love for the first time that next Sunday on my 16th birthday, not out in the open at the river between eating, reading, and fishing, but there together in our bed with the rich, buttery summer sun melting in through the blinds and the transistor playing Forever by the Little Dippers, with his mouth sweet, hungry, soft, and everywhere, with his work-roughened hand slowly lifting my slip up over my head, unsnapping each garter, and peeling down my stockings, easing off my bra and panties, cupping my face, stilling my trembling, laying me down hand sliding up beneath me, lifting me to meet him, when whispering, "It's all right, I won't hurt you," and then he did, but only a little, and I understood the pain and knew it wouldn't last, and it didn't, and we went on, and I discovered there is nothing in the world like being taken by a good man who loves you. OMG, the nice parts are almost worse than the horrible parts, I blubbered, laughing and grabbing 2 tissues out for me and for Gran because she was crying too. Seth had to work late again, so me, Sammy, and our boyfriend decided to go over to the bowling alley and surprise him, first time ever. Too bad he wasn't there. The girl at the shoe rental counter gave me a funny look when I said, "Hi, I'm Seth's girlfriend. Is he working tonight?" And she said, "No, not till Monday, I think," and this bad feeling washed through me. And I said, "Oh, okay, you don't by any chance know where he is, do you?" And you could see she knew something, but she wasn't going to tell, so I pulled out my phone to call him, and then Sammy said, "Wait, isn't there a party at Connor's tonight?" So we drove over there, and yeah, there definitely was something going on at Seth's car. His new old MG was there. We stopped, and they waited in the car while I went to the door, and it was unlocked, so I just walked right in. And it was a party, all right. I saw Seth hanging out talking to Connor and Phil, and this weird undercurrent ran through the room, and Seth looked up and saw me, blanched, then looked to the other side of the room, to the keg where a whole mess of people were, including Lacey McMullen, the blue-eyed shadowed sophomore. He got up fast, came right over, and said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" and put his arms around me. I wish I'd asked Sammy to come in with me, because I would have given $1,000 to see who he was looking at over the top of my head, but I didn't, so I never knew if it was Lacey. "Come on, let's get out to the car," he said, so we did. I told Sammy it was okay, she could leave now, and I did it on purpose because that MG is a 2-seater, and that shotgun seat is mine. And yeah, he might have come alone, but how weird was it that Lacey was here too, and I wasn't. Sammy and her boyfriend left, and me and Seth got into the car. Thank God the top was up, because I was so upset I was shaking, and said, "We went to the bowling alley to surprise you, only guess what?" And he said he was sorry, but yeah, he lied because he just wanted a night out on his own with the guys because he didn't have a lot of time to himself anymore, and he knew that if he'd just come out and said that, he never would have hurt my feelings, so he thought it would be better to make up an excuse. He held me and apologized and said he was glad I'd shown up because it wasn't that much fun without me. I didn't bring up Lacey, and he didn't bring up Lacey, and when he kissed me, it started out so sweet and tender, then got so raw we were clinging to each other, bridging back to each other, and it ended the questions. Being there with him in his arms quieted my crying, and dulled the hurt that he'd lied. We talked for a while, and he promised he wouldn't lie again. And I shouldn't either, although when exactly have I lied? And then he said, "Ready to go back to the party?" And he waited patiently while I put on my makeup, nodding at people going by, and in a beautiful gesture got out to go around and open my door. Right as he got out, I dropped my lip gloss, and it fell down alongside the seat into the back. He'd stopped to talk to somebody. I don't know who. I could only see his bottom half, so I wedged my hand down to get it. But the gap was too tight, and there was a spiral notebook shoved back there, down in the gap. So I pulled it out, thinking it was Seth's. Only it wasn't. It was someone else's. And in that second, I had a choice. Do not open it. Do not look. Put it back and go on believing everything is fine, or open it. See Lacey's name written in her stupid curly-key writing in the front cover. Close the notebook, get out of the car. Interrupt Seth, talking to Connor and Teresa, handing him the notebook. Watch as realization dawns in his eyes, and then turn rigid with sick, scalding fury and walk away. "Hannah," he said in a tone that wasn't pleading because there were too many people around and had a tinge of "oh crap, I'm in trouble" laughter in it. "Come on." "You should go after her," I heard Teresa say worriedly. "Hannah," Seth called again. "What are you going to do, walk all the way home? Come on, don't be stupid." I almost stopped. I did. I almost stopped and turned and let him coax me back, almost chase me again to believe him. But something wouldn't let me. Not this time. I just kept walking and waiting for him to chase me for a change, listening for the sound of that little MG's engine to rev, for him to pull up at the curb and stop me from walking away, and the further I got, the harder it was to call Sammy, to ask her to come back and pick me up. But I did it. I did it. Chapter 30. Hannah. Everyone at school knew we were in a fight, but I don't know if anyone knew the real reason why. Lacey could have told them. Seth could have told them. I could have, but I didn't. I was too miserable, and whispers were too intense and plentiful. Seth must have gotten to school early that first morning, because when I got to my locker, all the stuff I'd had in his locker was back in mine, and all his stuff was gone. I stood there numb, gray with shock, then tugged my first period books free, and turned to Sammy, who was sort of shielding me with her body, and giving the rubberneckers her evilest WTF are you looking at face. "Don't let him see me, okay?" "Okay," she said without hesitation, and steered me off on a brand new hall route. I don't remember much of that day, or even that week, only the times I caught sight of Seth in the distance, and then the clawed fist, gripping my heart would tighten and shoot red streaks of pain through the numbing fog. and I might have to go into the girls' room, and if it was crowded, shut myself in a stall and just sit there and breathe. I don't know if we were broken up or if we were just waiting, like I was waiting. I wanted to blame Lacey. It would have been so easy to blame Lacey, to tell myself that she had offered, so of course he accepted, to make an excuse for Seth, just so I could stay blind and tell myself it wasn't him who had done me wrong, but Lacey didn't owe me anything. Seth owed me his loyalty and betrayed me, and it was as simple and as complicated as that. School. I hated it. I am gray all day. Samian said she saw Seth in the hall, and he looked stoned but not happy. He didn't look at her as they passed. I went into the girls' room and came face to face with Lacey. I stopped dead blocking the doorway. She went totally white and sucked in her breath, and her eyes got huge and terrified, and the weirdest thing was in that moment I could have been a hunter, and she a yearling, or a robber, and she a counter girl, trapped and frozen and helpless, because even though my heart was pounding and my adrenaline racing, I had all the power and I knew it. I could hit her, kick her, shred her with words, hold her there, rip out her hair, throw her purse in the toilet, and she couldn't do anything back but cringe, crouch, cry, and in the end, hope I showed mercy and pray for it to be over. I looked at her for so long that tears welled in and spilled out of her eyes. The sight of them cracked my amusement, and I stepped aside out of the doorway, stepped far enough away and watched as she sidled by and slipped out, and then I got a bad case of the cold sweats and had to wobble in and sit down on a toilet and put my head between my knees, thinking of how close I'd come to being something I would have hated. Seth cheated on me, I said to Gran. I think we've broken up. She trembled. I hit play and cried silently, huddled in my chair with Sarepta on my lap. How it ends. That Sunday night, after Peter gave me my birthday gifts, a single pearl suspended on a gold chain and a tiny little tin of anything in Paris talcum powder, and I blew out the candles on my cake. We took the slices to bed with us, and while we were eating them, as if we had discussed it beforehand and decided it was time, we started to talk about our pasts. Peter told me that he had left Holland to come over to America alone at 15, 2 years after surviving the hunger winter of 1945, and that he hoped he never saw a sugar beet again for as long as he lived. He smiled when he said it, but his eyes were bleak, and I was going to try and change the subject, but he shook his head and said, "You're my wife, you're entitled to know," and told me a brief story no one else knew, until you, now. Peter told me that between the time he landed in America at 15 and the moment he met me, he had feared nothing of this world, for the worst had already happened before he left Nazi-occupied Holland. He was the son of a music teacher and a gunsmith, the youngest of 3 with 2 older sisters. He was 13 when the hunger winter claimed his sisters, 13 and a half when the soldiers dragged the remaining villagers from their homes and made them stand at gunpoint and watch as they degraded the women, and his father lunged forward in animal rage and would have made it to his wife half naked and bleeding in the dirt if he hadn't been shot in the back, as his mother mewled and sobbed, trying to cover herself to reach his body as the soldier, smirking with cold disgust, hit her with his rifle butt, opened his pants, peed on her, and then fired one last round. The worst had happened as Peter, big for his age even then, started for the soldier and was knocked down, made to crawl past his father's body, don't look, to his mother's, and when he closed his eyes, ashamed to gaze upon her nudity and defilement, his shame earned him a boot to the ribs, flipped him over, and coming down hard on his throat, a boot caked with bloody mud, and then a gob of spit and a rifle butt slamming down into his face, his mouth shattering his teeth with an agony unlike any other, and in that instant his fear died. Later, when the soldiers had beaten others, killed 2 of his schoolmates, stolen the meager food supplies, ransacked their homes, and left, he rose shaking, blood in his mouth, blood in his eyes and ears, and limped to his mother, covering her nakedness with his own shirt, lifted her and carried her home. He set her gently in her bed and went back for his father. No one helped him, as they had their own dead to care for, their own naked shame to cover. He laid his father next to his mother, drew the quilt over them, and closed the door. He stayed in the house, lost, dazed, until the smell from the room with the closed door became too much, and he dug up the few valuables the family had left, kept only there because there was no food to bar them for, and left the village to make his way out of Holland. 2 years later, at 15, armed with a false set of documents, a new name, and little else, he stepped off the boat alone at Ellis Island. He was silent and solemn, a young man of medium height, who looked older than he was, with thick black hair, a broad back, and corded forearms, with a quick gaze that saw and weighed everything. He never smiled, ashamed of the few shattered stubs of teeth left in the front of his mouth, and bore the frequent ache with a stoic acceptance. He kept to himself, worked in back rooms and docks, hauling freight, carrying boxes, doing heavy lifting, grunt work, hard muscle-building work where the boss never spoke to you, never asked your name, never offered it because you were one of the sea of tired faces, hungry faces, desperate, dirty, drawn faces, those of immigrants whose hid limps and old aches from badly set, broken bones Men with withered arms, missing arms, and hungry children, crying wives, men who took the day labor and were grateful for the $1, $2, $5 handed to them at the end of the 12 hours. First thing I bought were these, and I had to put them on time payments, Peter said quietly, pressing a thumb to his front teeth and avoiding my gaze. It took me 3 years to pay them off. I hope you don't mind I didn't tell you before. No, not at all, I said, humbled by what he'd gone through. I just can't imagine how terrifying it must have been to leave your home and come to a whole new country. It wasn't, he said, sighing and rubbing a hand over his knuckles. Nothing was. He glanced at me, gaze solemn. There's only one thing that can scare me now, and that's the thought of losing you. That's the only thing in the world that would kill me. Well, then, you ought to live forever, because you're never going to lose me, and I'm never going to lose you, I said, and quickly fed him a piece of my cake and kissed him, and little by little the terrible bleakness faded. He said it was my turn, so I summoned my nerve and told him my parents' love story, all of it, including the shock of discovering they might not have been married, and how I hated the word bastard now, and he said, so why ever tell anyone again, Louise? They're gone, and you're a married woman in a place where no one knows you. Why not just say they were married? Who can prove otherwise? And that, in a nutshell, is how the reinvention began. We worked hard the next few years, scrimping and putting almost all of our money into a savings account for our first home. We were very careful making love, as we both wanted children, but not until we had a settled place for them. Peter took extra work whenever or wherever he could find it, and that became our living money while most of the rest was banked. The worst fight we had was after Peter stopped in the diner one day for supper and saw one of the regular patrons, a burly guy with a roving eye and a belief that waitresses expected to be mauled for their tips, reached out and slapped my behind as I whizzed by with a tray full of hot food. I missed the initial contact, but when I heard the commotion, set the tray on the table, turned, Peter had the guy up against the wall by the throat, and with dead cold fury said, "Don't ever do that again." He held the guy's bulging gaze, riveted with dead-on calm for a second longer, then released him, tense as the guy stared back, and the cook shouted, "Hey," and came out of the kitchen with a cleaver and said, "Peter," and the guy sneered and Peter waited ready, and then the guy threw a couple of dollars on the floor and said, "Effin' immigrants can't even speak English," and sauntered out, and only my fierce grip on Peter's arm, I think, kept him from going after him. He was angry at me that night, both for not telling him about the guy in the first place and then for holding him back. We had a terrible fight with me saying I could have handled it myself and him saying, "How? By smiling and ignoring it? By saying nicely, 'Don't do that, please, okay?' Do you think that's going to stop a guy like that?" About me getting furious because he was right. I had already done both of those things and it hadn't worked. But I still didn't want him in there creating a scene, getting me into trouble and maybe even fired. And besides, the guy was bigger than Peter. I made the mistake of saying that, and Peter lifted his head and narrowed his eyes, and in a flat voice said, "I've handled worse," and turned and walked out. We didn't go out much, maybe for a burger once a week or to the movies once every couple of months. We didn't do a lot of socializing because, well, we were happy in each other's company. We liked each other, liked walking in the door and seeing each other's smiling face, telling stories or debating stuff on the news, or curling up reading or having tickling matches or french fries for supper. We went on dates to the river, where we actually made love once in the water, out of sight of the road, and on Sunday drives to fairs and carnivals and out for coffee. It didn't matter where we were so much as we were together, and within 5 years we bought our first cozy little starter house in a neighborhood of starter houses. We dug a big garden in the back and planted vegetables, scoured the newspaper for garage sales, and slowly but surely finished the rooms. We got 2 free puppies, a boy who was part Beagle, part Schnauzer, and a girl who was part German Shepherd and part Afghan Hound, named the Sonny and Cher, and watched them grow into a pair of devoted, smart, mischievous beauties. I took as many hours as the diner would give me, and Peter worked at least 1 railroad double shift a week. He'd moved up to conductor now and was always bringing home anything left longer than 90 days in the lost and found. We had more lost hats, gloves, umbrellas, and everyone else on the block combined. And finally, after 2 more years and comforting some in the evening's account, we decided to stop being careful about making love and start a family. 34 periods and much heartache later, I finally scheduled my first and much dreaded visit to the gynecologist, a gruff elderly man, and I'd chosen because Carl the relatress used him and I knew of no one else. He noticed one of my old abdominal scars while examining me. I remember distinctly the way his face changed when he saw it, then lifted the embarrassing paper gown and located the other one, pulled down the gown, pulled off his rubber gloves. Just seeing them made me want to run screaming right out of the office, pushed back the stool, and told me to sit up. He asked me if I'd had any abortions or any children while very young, children of unfortunate circumstance that I might have delivered and given up for adoption. The nurse's expression remained carefully blank but mortified, and I said, "No, of course not." He asked me my IQ, and when I looked at him puzzled, said I didn't know. He asked if I'd been put in special remedial classes, or had attended a normal high school. "A regular high school," I said, and then eyeing me as though every single answer I'd given was a lie, he said, "Was your mother an unmarried woman? Were either of your parents criminals declared mentally incompetent, or—" "I don't understand why you're asking me this," I asked, voice shaking. "I came here to find out why I haven't conceived, and you're—" "Calm down, Louise." He exchanged glances with the nurse, patted my knee, and rose. "I see women all the time who are just not meant to have children. I'm sorry to say that seems true in your case as well." He met my stricken gaze. "It isn't the end of the world. You and your husband can still have a somewhat satisfying life. Just think of all the shopping and traveling you can do without shopping. Traveling? What the H was he saying? "But we want a baby," I said, hands twisting in my lap. "It's all we want, Doctor, a family of our own. Wait, you don't understand. Take all the time you need to compose yourself," he said over his shoulder as he headed for the door. "Nurse?" "Coming," she said, and casting me a brief sympathetic look, followed him out. Looking back, it's odd that I never equated those 2 small scars on my abdomen with my inability to get pregnant. That terrifying, confusing time in the state hospital after my mother died was so hazy now that it seemed like it had happened to someone else, and although Peter had undoubtedly registered the existence of my scars, he never put 2 and 2 together either. Why should we have? We had never heard of a mandatory sterilization for the unfit, and wouldn't for years, until investigative journalists exposed the practice, and by then I had sworn off doctors so completely that not even the idea of a baby could induce me to see one. "Wow," I breathed, falling back against the chair and shaking my head. "They sterilized her when she was how old, 13? I sat there, foot-tapping, scowling, scratching my elbow, and then drumming my fingers on the arm of the chair until I couldn't take it any more. "What is exactly about female reproductive organs that makes guys think they have the right to mess with them?" Gran swallowed. "I mean, where did they get off doing stuff like that anyway?" I jumped up and started pacing, because first it had been Miss Bame and now it was Louise. "Seriously, Gran, what the H? I mean, I don't go around trying to regulate the contents of their testicles." Grandpa, who had just opened the door to walk in, winced, turned, and walked right back out again. "Or decide who should be castrated because they're not worth breeding. So where do they get off being so obsessed with the contents of my uterus? I mean, just mind your own business already, and worry about your own organs instead of mine, I swear." I railed at home, too, driving my father from the room and trying not to tell too much of the book so my mother would still want to hear it. Only it really aggravated me, so I called Crystal and told her, and then Sammy, too, who said her boyfriend had been sitting next to her, that I'd yelled uterus so loud that he'd quickly gotten up and left the room. Good. They should all leave the room and leave the fates of uteri up to their owners. Sammy called and told me Teresa had gone to a party at Phil's and Seth had been there. "With anyone?" I said, sinking onto the edge of my bed, because if he had brought someone, then we were officially over. "No, but she said he got so messed up that he had to stay at Phil's because there was no way he could drive," Sammy said. "I don't suppose she asked him about me," I said. "Well, yeah, she said she went outside to get high with him, and while they were smoking she asked if you guys were still together, and he just looked at her real cold and said, 'Tell Hannah if she wants to know that, she'll have to ask me herself,'" Sammy said. I sat silently for a minute, feeling a hot pain sparked something less than anger, but more than irritation and a weird stirring of excitement, because he hadn't said, "No, we've broken up." Instead, he had sent me a message, and okay, it wasn't exactly an apology on a bended knee, but he had broken the stalemate, and that meant, "Hannah," Sammy said tentatively, "what are you thinking?" I told her, and she sighed. "What?" I said a little defensively. "I wasn't going to tell you this part, but now I had to," she said, sounding upset. She said he also tried to come on to her. "What?" I said. She said, "And don't tell her I told you, because she didn't want to hurt you. When they were done getting high, he kind of backed her against the wall, and at first she thought he was kidding, or she was imagining it, but then he put a hand up on each side of her, and she was like, 'Whoa, not gonna happen,' and slipped away. He laughed, but not in a good way, and she went inside and just hung out with Bill for most of the night." She fell silent. "Are you mad at me for telling you?" "No," I said, turning away from my reflection in the mirror. "It's better than I know, although I bet I know why he did it." "Why?" Sammy said wearily. "Because he knew it would get back to me," I said, and was completely unprepared for her response. "How about just because he's an a-hole, and he doesn't care how much he hurts you?" she snapped. "Yeah, that could be it, too. I saw Seth today. Not right up close, but passing him in the hall. I don't know how it happened, because I'd been so careful to avoid all his routes, but I was walking and trying to find something in my notebook, and I just got this feeling and glanced up. He was coming toward me in the flow of traffic. He quickly averted his gaze before our eyes met. I know people who were watching, so I just looked back into my notebook, and we passed, and I smelled his beautiful scent. My knees actually got weak. How long is this stalemate going to last?" "I haven't worn my ankle bracelet since the night I walked away and he didn't come after me. I wonder if he's mad about that. I've laid on my bed, stared at the ceiling, and listened to Sweet Jane over and over, trying to figure out whether or not I should make the first move toward getting back with him. All it would take was wearing that bracelet." "Gran doesn't look good at all today." She's flailing all over the place, and I'm afraid she's going to fall right out of her wheelchair, even though she's belted in. Even worse, I think she might have peed herself, because I can smell it. But there is no way I can change her, I just can't. It would be a major violation, and I wouldn't even know how to begin. How it ends. Peter, heartbroken that there would be no natural child, retreated into himself, and when I told him I was hurting too, he held me briefly and said, "I know, Louise, just give me some time." It was his way to retreat into a place I couldn't go, and although it frustrated me sometimes because I never really knew what he was thinking or processing when it decided, trying to make him talk about it was like banging my head against a brick wall and only made things worse. So I put all into working and saving. But the times they were changing, and the neighborhood fell to a never-ending wave of broke-stoned, brawlers, sometimes dirty and desperate, sometimes charming and cheerful, often earnest and always hungry, free love, let it all hang out, don't trust anyone over 30, do your own thing hippies. The kids weren't bad except for the occasional vomit on the lawn or porch, the casual appropriation of anything left outside that could be sold or bartered for pot, acid, or food, and the nerve-wracking habit they had of just opening the door, flashing a peace sign, and wandering in whenever they felt like it. Some of them were my age, and a lot of the guys thought I should quit being a tool for the man, F the establishment, and tune in, turn on, and drop out with them, but I always told them that if I did that, then there wouldn't be any food here or either, and then where would they eat for free? "Bummer," they'd good-naturedly mutter, and swiping a slice of cheese or an orange, wander back out to find the guy with the psychedelics. Someone, I never found out who, decided the dogs, our beloved Sonny and Cher, would be happier, free man, not locked up in the backyard like prisoners, so they opened the gate while Peter and I were at work, removed the dogs' collars, and let them go. We ran looking for them for hours, handing out hastily scrawled flyers, posting lost dog signs on the phone poles, asking everyone hanging out on the block if they'd seen the dogs, and getting only slow, wide-eyed shaking heads and vague memories of thinking that they might have gone that way or the other way. It was awful. I couldn't sleep, couldn't stop crying and thinking of them out there in traffic, hungry, stolen, lost, maybe hurt, unable to find their way home. And what if they'd gotten split up? They did everything together, eat, slept, played, peed, dug holes, stole snacks, so how could they survive without each other? Or why hadn't I locked them in the house instead of leaving them in the yard? Why? Exhausted, Peter hit me with that same question, and it salted the wound so keenly that I raged back, saying that it was him who hadn't wanted the dog sleeping on the couch while we were at work, and it was his rule, not mine, so if they were starving or dead out there somewhere, then he had no one to blame for it but himself. "You know what," he said, "you're right. It's my fault. Everything that goes wrong here is my fault." "I didn't say that," I said, already regretting lashing out at him. "I didn't mean it. I can't stand the thought of them, lost out there, all alone," and I started crying all over again. And this time, instead of pushing him away, I leaned against him, and his arms came around me, and not tightly this time, but there all the time. 16 days after replacing the lost dog sign with the reward signs, I pulled up a dark-haired, moon-faced girl in tie-dye, and she got out and knocked at the door. "Hey, man, I think I found your dogs," she said, scratching the inside of her arm and avoiding my gaze. "They're in the back of the truck, but—" I pushed past her, running down the steps into the back of the pickup. "Sonny, Cher, son—" I went still, gazing at the dogs, my dogs, lying on their sides on the hot metal, fur stretched over bones, too weak to even lift their heads, filthy, sunken, and I gasped, "Oh, no!" And Sonny managed to twitch the tip of his stubby tail in a feeble wag. I shouted for Peter and scaled the truck's tailgate, crying, crouching in there with them, running my hands gently over their heads, babbling, you're home, you're going to be fine," and gagging at their filthy, sun-baked smell. Peter took one look at them and, swearing, jerked down the tailgate and lifted Cher in his arms. "Open the car," he said, and I scrambled past him, past the girl, who said, "There's a reward, right?" And I flung open the back doors of our car, and while Peter was laying Cher across the seat, I ran for water and wet a paper towel and squeezed some of it into her mouth while the girl said, "You said there was a reward, right?" And Cher licked my hand once and exhaled and never inhaled again. I stared at the dog in disbelief a moment and then backed out of the car, turned on the girl in cold rage, said, "Where did you find these dogs?" "There's a where?" I shouted, making her cringe back against the car. "Did you steal them?" "No, man, I swear they were chained up behind a pad down in Saxon," she babbled, scratching her arm. "Some bony dude brought them down there a couple of weeks ago and then just, never came back." "Whose house?" I said. "I don't know," she said, trying to inch away. "A lot of people crossed at that place, but no one remembered to feed the dogs," I said, breathing hard. "No one heard them barking or crying or begging for food or water. No one—" "Hey, you're flipping out, and I didn't have to come here," she said, flinging back her frizzy hair. "I could have just left them there." "But there was a reward," I said, as I caught sight of Peter, straddling, slumped, and head bowed over a limp Sonny in his arms. "Can't collect the reward if the dogs are dead, right?" Well, yeah, she said, shrugging a shoulder and looking away. I mean, bread's bread, and there's never enough, you know. You gotta eat. I stared at her, incredulous. Get out of here. Go, or I swear to Christ I'll... Peace, she said, and scuttling past me, scrambled into the truck. It pulled a screeching U-turn, and as it blasted past, she struck her arm out the window and gave me the finger. We buried the dog's neck together next to the garden, and I didn't cry until I looked up and saw some of the kids on the block, girls mostly, but a sprinkling of guys too, standing there in line, each with a flower and waiting to pay their respects. The neighborhood wasn't good for us anymore, so we put our house on the market and sold it to a man of about 40 wearing a terrible toupee, striped bells, and a crushed velvet Nehru jacket. He came arm in arm with a skinny gray-toothed woman who giggled and said far out while she walked into each of my neat, freshly painted rooms. I hated them both. By the time the house changed hands, I was more than ready to go. Instead of buying a neighborhood where our future children would have plenty of playmates, we bought a wooded piece of land with a big old farmhouse and outbuildings where we could shut out the world and live in the way we wanted. The new place, our new place, changed almost everything. The house and the land embraced us. The first moment I saw it, something inside my heart opened and whispered, yes, oh yes, and kept on delighting as we explored the rooms, admired the giant hearth in the kitchen, the fireplaces scattered throughout. We smiled at our white plaster walls, deep windowsills, and Dutch doors. We stood under the towering catalpa tree in the back, gazed out across the gently rolling green lawn, the wild woods, and the little pond down the hill. It'll be a bear to heat in the winter, Peter said, eyeing the size of the place. There's a wood stove and fireplaces, but the rest is electric baseboard. We might have to close off the rooms we're not using so we don't go straight to the poorhouse. Okay, I said, dazzled by the sight of a towering sugar maple beginning to turn red and a giant tangled knot of wild roses and blackberry bushes spreading alongside it. He shot me an amused look. I'm going to need a snow plow for the pickup, too. There's no way I'm going to shovel this driveway. I'll have a heart attack before I even get past the pines. Okay, I said, spellbound at the sight of a doe poised at the tree line down near the pond. She lifted her head and sniffed the air and then sauntered across the grass and started grazing. Another joined it, and a moment later 2 more. Oh yes, oh yes. Okay to all of it, to anything. Including the French maid, he said, laughing when I smacked him in the arm. Do you see that? I said, nodding in the doe's direction. It's an omen. It is. It's our home. It's true, I can feel it. He watched the deer for a moment, tawny and graceful, in the late afternoon sunlight, and said quietly, me too. His hand closed around mine. I think we could be really happy here. Oh yes, I whispered. Peter started singing again. Not only when he left for work now, day shifts, because he had some seniority under his belt, but when he came home, the door would open and he would greet me with lovely Rita, and lift me in a hug, or kiss me when I laughed and dangled and hugged him back, near tears because it felt so good to be happy again. He tilled me 2 gardens, one for flowers and one for vegetables, as I learned something, listening to the hippie chicks, that was about eating organic, and I wanted to try it. Peter didn't. He said he wasn't giving up chili dogs for anybody. And that was fine, because it meant I could plant whatever I wanted and reap whatever I sowed. Peter wanted to live off the land too, but thankfully, while he did buy a shotgun and ammunition, that vision shifted to less lethal one the first time a young buck at the salt lick, antlers fuzzy with velvet, lifted his head and stared back as we watched from the porch, breathless with admiration. Dr. Baindock killing and gutting them, stuffing and poisoning them, was bringing the natural world to life, I murmured, not wanting to frighten the buck away. Bane was an a-hole, Peter said, and went and brought a roll of private property, no hunting allowed signs, which we stapled to the trees throughout the woods just in case the ones at the property line were disregarded. From then on, although it was never defined to outsiders as such, our home became a sanctuary to all and any and all wildlife that chose to live there, and the shotgun stored in its case in the closet has yet to be used to kill anything. The place came with barn cats, 3 wily young males who took months to get close, and only then because I'd been feeding them through that first hard winter. I convinced Peter to take them in to be neutered, having read that fixed cats live longer, happier lives, and were less likely to roam or get into fights, and besides the time he did, we had 2 more cats, pregnant females, who delivered a total of 5 sweet kittens, who also had to be caught and spayed once the kittens were weaned. I'd never had a cat before, so we brought the females and their brood into the house to stay, and as I couldn't bear the thought of those playful little fluffballs falling prey to the owls or hawks or even the occasional car speeding along the winding country road, one kitten, a cranky-looking tiger named Wren, with a tail that stuck straight in the air, and a perpetual scowl as if we existed only to thwart him, climbed up on the couch and wobbled onto my lap one afternoon. He looked at my face and began kneading my leg, tiny noodle claws making a pincushion out of my thigh, but the expression on his unhappy little face grew so slow-eyed and dreamy that I sat enchanted as his kitten purr rumbled out, and his kneading intensified until finally, overcome by his own contentment, he collapsed asleep. Thanks to Wren, I fell head over heels in love with cats. Money was tight that winter, and after being late twice on the electric bill, I decided to stop waitressing and apply for an office job instead. The benefits and pay were better, and it would be a relief to sit all day. So I went to a mortgage company in town and for the first time ever was asked to fill out an application. I read through the questions, heart pounding with a casual confidence I didn't feel, checked yes next to, did you graduate high school? And when asked where, what year, wrote in the name of the high school back in the town I'd lived in before my mother had died, and the year I would have graduated had I been allowed to keep going. I hoped because I was out of state and so far away no one would bother to check. That night, when telling Peter about it, I discovered he'd always said yes to that question too, adjusting the date he'd arrived here to accommodate a high school graduation in Holland, so as not to automatically be disqualified from his career. But we're lying, I said. Wiess, do you think you're a stupid woman? He countered, leaning back in his chair and running a hand over his hair. What? I said. Do you think you're stupid? He said. No, I said, frowning. No, he said, as if in agreement. You read everything you can get your hands on. You have an extensive history in customer service. You're used to making decisions on your own. You're a whiz at managing our finances, what little there is of them. He grinned at my look. You're an independent worker who doesn't need a supervisor hanging over her shoulder all day just to make you perform. You speak well, you reason even better, and you'd be an asset to any company smart enough to hire you. His smile faded. Now you can go in there, offer them all of that, and make them gladder than H they hired you. Or you can check no, and tell them you didn't graduate high school and watch how fast the door closes and you're out of there. Do you really think that's what would happen? I said. You have an interview tomorrow, right? Well, if you want to test that theory, go in and change your yes to a no and see what happens. He snorted. Standards are set by people who have decided that you can't possibly be considered smart unless some fat cat sitting behind a desk in some institution somewhere decides you are and rubber stamps you to make it official. His voice grew bitter. You know Hitler's youth was considered the best and brightest once, too. And look at where all that lockstep conformity got them. All right, I said with a sigh, I get the point. So I left it as a yes and got the position. The money was good, but I was better, and I was determined never to make them sorry they'd hired me. I did so well processing mortgage applications that I was promoted to assistant supervisor of the department and then supervisor. I attended training sessions and seminars and soon had framed certificates marching in rows across my walls. I was proud of them, but in a distant, impersonal way. They meant a lot to the fictional Louise, who had chosen not to have children, whose parents had absolutely been married, and who had definitely graduated high school. Not to the real me, whose journey had started the morning she found her mother dead. With no children growing up and reminding us that we were getting older, time seemed inexhaustible, gliding by in the whole seasons rather than days or weeks. Fall into winter was the hardest for me, as the brutal snow, ice, and wind scoured the acres, driving some animals into hibernation and others into a desperate daily search for food. I did research the library, made lists of the types of plants the land would support, and what the animals on it needed to help them survive, and in spring planted white oak and crabapple trees, Easter red cedars, dogwoods, sumacs, hemlocks, and honey locusts. More cats came, sad, scrawny, cringing souls dumped by people who told themselves that cats could survive in the wild without a problem because, look, they have claws, or lied to their children they'll find a good home on the farm, when instead, lost and terrified, they were often hit by cars, attacked by animals, or died of starvation because they were domesticated cats, not cougars, and simply couldn't know what to do. Peter called me a bleeding heart for feeding them. But what was the alternative? Turning my back on their hunger and desperation because I didn't want to see it? And ignoring it because their life or death struggle inconvenienced me? Impossible. If I hadn't learned anything else from Margaret Bame, I learned that. So even though Peter sighed and muttered about going to the poorhouse, I noticed he always scraped his plate into the scrap bowl, or stooped to pet whoever was brave enough to wind around his ankles on his way out to the barn. I loved him even more for his good heart. We got 3 chicks for an ongoing supply of fresh eggs, and they grew into hens and a rooster, who became Cindy Lucy and the rooster Brunhilda. Peter laughed when I named the rooster, and for a while, every time he would pass the proud, muscular Rhode Island red scratching in the yard, he would sing in a warbling Elmer Fudd-type opera voice, "Oh, Brunhilda, you so wubby." The rooster would pause, giving him a beady look, and I would call, "You're asking for it," but he would just laugh and keep going. All that ended one fall afternoon when Peter was kneeling at the edge of the garden, sitting back on his heels and hunched over, deeply involved in planting a second crop of lettuce seedlings. His jeans, always hanging low on his hips, hung even lower in the back. His t-shirt had ridden up too, exposing, at least from one bird's-eye view, a dark, alluring crevice that might have contained any number of fat, tasty grubs or scurrying beetles, and must have seemed maddeningly irresistible in the ongoing quest for dinner. I was washing the dishes, thinking that Peter really did need a new belt for Christmas, and absently watching Brunhilde stalking around behind him. When I finally realized what was happening, it was too late. The big bird zeroed in, cocked his head, and eyeballing that intriguing new crack in the landscape, rammed his beak into the promising darkness. It was electrifying. By the time I'd wiped the streaming tears from my eyes and staggered out onto the porch, Brunhilde had found safety behind his girlfriends and was muttering at being so cruelly misled, and Peter was muttering back, twisting around, groping himself and trying to make out the damage. "Did you see what that crazy bird did?" he said, looking both bewildered and outraged. "What the H kind of rooster pecks a guy in the A?" "He was provoked," I said, and then buried my face in my hands and howled. One summer, the last truly and pure and happy one, on Peter's birthday. I was upstairs getting dressed to go to work, standing at the back window in my slip, wishing for a cool breeze, debating whether to put on the dreaded pantyhose, when I spotted Peter standing out at the edge of the lawn looking at the pond. He wasn't doing anything in particular, just standing there, gazing at the water, a man whose thick black hair was now gray at the temples, whose beautiful summer tawny skin was looser, and whose muscular arms were growing slack, a man whose accent still stumped me at times, and who still sang occasionally, but no longer the newest songs, preferring to stick with old favorites like Let It Be. A man who once said, "I've crossed the state line, Louise. I can either leave you somewhere or you can marry me, whatever you choose," and who then had to go on to make me happier than I ever thought possible. I don't know where it came from, the rush of love that rose and enveloped me, the sudden desire to be that girl again, and him that young man who had kissed and danced by the river, those two who had taken such a pleasure in learning each other inch by inch. I looked at the clock, then at Peter, who had turned away from the water and was walking slowly back across the lawn toward the house, dropped the pantyhose, ran down the stairs and out into the back porch, scattering stray cats and causing him to look up in alarm. "What?" he called, walking faster. "Nothing, stay there," I said, half laughing, near tears, as I patted down the steps and ran across the grass to meet him. "I just love you, that's all, and I wanted to say thank you for loving me back." He tilted his head and gazed at me, eyes twinkling and his mouth curving into a wonderful, bemused smile. "You know you're out here in your underwear." "Am I?" said, leaning forward and kissing the spot beneath his ear. "People will talk," he said, shivering. "If they can see us, they're trespassing," I murmured, kissing it again, and sliding my arms around his waist. "Let them tell it to the judge." "What are you doing?" he said huskily as I backed him toward a particularly thick patch of clover and sank to my knees. "Everything I can think of," I said, tugging him down beside me. "Watch out for bees," he said, and then with a small wicked smile, "Maybe you'd better not sit in the grass, Louise, maybe I'd better stay right up here," I whispered, hiking up my slip, and then his eyes got smoky, and his hand slid up beneath the lacy silk, and mine fumbled with his button and zipper, and I knelt over him, kissing and taking him, and the sun burned my back, and the clovers stained my knees, and he did get stung once on the thigh, and several of the cats crept closer and watched worriedly from the underbrush, and I laughed and touched the gray at his temples, and the lines of his dear sweet face, and whispered, "Oh yes," because what I had hoped to discover was true. In our hearts we were still who we'd started as. "I can't take this story," I said, turning off the CD player. "First it's a tragedy, then a horror story, then a romance, and now it's what? A back to the land thing? It's a roller coaster, Gran, and no matter where I think it's going, it never goes there." I rose and, shaking my head, walked into the kitchen singing, "Oh, Brunhilde, you're so lovely. I wish I had chickens." It was cold walking home across the back. At the gap in the little woods I stopped and opened my cell, not because anything had come out, but because this was where I'd been when Seth had texted me about the New Year's Eve party. "We haven't talked in more than 2 weeks. If we don't hurry, there might be no going back." Sammy told me she saw Lacey and Seth talking in the upstairs hallway at his locker. She said she was too far away to hear anything and couldn't really see their expressions, but that Lacey looked more intense than Seth did. I said, "Of course she did. She's the one who wants, and he's the one who gets." And that sounded really mean, but at the minute I was exactly how I felt, and it didn't matter if Lacey was the one who'd gone up to him, like I had so many times in the past, tracking him down and making it easy for him, making myself available so he wouldn't even have to reach too far and maybe strain himself while I got shin splints from racing around the school every day just to be in the right place at the right time. The whole thing put me in a bad mood, the stalemate, the worsening weather, knowing deer season was coming again, and now having the whole BAME taxidermy weird